let me be clear. I am not an Ilya Ilyin fan. If you doped twice in our sport in the Olympic Games, if you're a fan of our sport, you should not be a fan of Ilya Ilyin. And that's full stop. Why? Because Ilya Ilyin, along with others who doped in those two Olympic Games, very, very, very close to having our sport eliminated for the Olympic Games.
Hi guys, welcome to the show. My name is Seb Ostrovich, aka the Voice of the People, and this is the Weightlifting House podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Weightlifting House podcast with your host Seb Ostrovich, the Voice of the People, joined this week by a very special guest, the CEO, the head of USA Weightlifting, Phil Andrews. Phil, how are you doing?
Not too bad. You?
I'm very good. I just said to you before we started that it's nice to hear a British accent, and my accent is mocked pretty routinely on this podcast, so it's nice that I'm not the only one now who's going to get a bit of stick for how they sound.
Oh, don't worry. That happens every day. It's a necessary piece of being involved in USA weightlifting that you get to mock my accent.
Yeah, I think that's only fair.
Well, the problem I have is that I have this kind of Brit-American accent at this point, so I get mocked by my British friends about having an American accent and mocked by my American friends and colleagues about having a British accent. So I'm actually in England next week, and for a christening, and I'm certain that I will not escape mocking of my accent during that trip.
I'm sure not. I'm sat here right now with a cup of tea, which is obviously one of the fine treats that we get in the UK. I was in the USA about a month ago, couldn't find a decent cup of tea anywhere, and I imagine that's the sort of thing that you're wishing you had right now. Have you been able to find proper tea out there in the USA?
Well, I have a secret. I import Yorkshire tea all the time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Every time I go to the UK, I buy 200 bags of Yorkshire tea.
It's not a bad cup. Not a bad cup of tea, that one.
Right, which is everyone who tries it here is like, oh, yes, that is how tea should taste.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There is a couple of good ones over here. Celestial Seasonings, I think it's called. They're based up in Boulder, Colorado. Sorry about that, mate.
No, it's fine.
My computer completely died last night.
Right. Okay.
So apparently my small knock of the plug, whilst the plug didn't come fully out of the ground, the computer decided that was more than enough for it to shut down. So,
well, I must admit, I don't see that as being your fault. I've decided since being in America a few times that the plug system over there is just awful. It's a failure. It's like the appliances never truly get slot in perfectly. It's I don't see that as being your fault, basically.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So, I guess a lot of people here do know you. I'm sure some of them have heard you on podcasts before. I know that you were your election was overwhelmingly positively received, which is great. But I thought maybe we could just sort of talk a little bit about your background, how you kind of became to be the CEO of USA Weightlifting. As far as I know, you may well correct me here, but you were never an international weightlifter or anything like that. So kind of what is it that led you to the USA and then to try and achieve this role that you currently hold?
Yeah, definitely not. I had no involvement in England in weightlifting, really.
Right.
I saw a little bit of weightlifting, but had no real involvement in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting when I meet British people in my US role, and they're sort of looking at me like, who are you?
Yeah.
Where did you come from?
Uh-huh.
But you're right. I had virtually no involvement there. I do want to correct you. I wasn't elected. Our board is elected, and our board employ me. So,
okay.
it's similar to England in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO is the top-ranking employed individual.
Right. Okay.
That also occupies the general secretary role in our organization. Not every NGB in the US is set up that way, but my full title is Chief Executive Officer and General Secretary. But
I see.
it takes me 20 minutes to introduce myself if I use the full title. So,
of course,
but yeah. So our board was kind enough to put their trust in me to run the organization. Where was I? So you asked my background. I worked for a university in London called the University of East London. which is about 23,000 person university.
And I had no idea. What were you doing there? I had no idea you worked there.
So I ran basically things that made the university money that was not directly related to teaching.
Right.
So things like catering, conferences, housing, summer schools, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And that led me to the Olympic contract. So, which our biggest role, or I guess the most intense role during the games, was looking after Team USA's training base in London. So we did something called team processing in England. You know that as kitting out. We also hosted the biggest thing was the training site. The US has a concept called the High Performance Training Center, which is essentially where the US team trains during the Olympic Games.
Right. Okay.
Where's the media center, food and beverage center, ticket center, basically anything the USOC was doing in London was hosted by the University of East London.
Oh, so were you at this point when this is during 2012? Were you interested in weightlifting at this point, or were you still yet to kind of fall in love with the sport?
I happened to go to a couple of sessions for weightlifting because it was Excel. It's right down the road.
Yeah, sure.
And we were able to get some tickets for weightlifting. But I didn't as such see myself as later being involved in weightlifting on a full-time basis. No, I mean, if you'd told me this is what my life would look like today, I would have been rather surprised. But it's been a very good journey. It's now a sport I've become, as I think everybody knows, tremendously passionate about.
Yeah, of course.
But it's not a sport I set out necessarily to be involved in.
Well, that tends to be how weightlifting is. I mean, obviously in the UK with football, or as our listeners know it as soccer, it's like you're born into it, and you're kind of indoctrinated into it. But with something like weightlifting, you don't tend to find it until later on in life, and it just hits you so hard. It doesn't hit everyone, but for the people that it hits, it just sticks with them, and it's so easy to become obsessed and really feel passionate about the sport.
Okay, and I agree. We've certainly in countries like the US and the UK, and I think Australia's similar, Canada's similar, and many others, I'm certain. Weightlifting is a sport that a lot of people find late. We actually have an active recruitment program where we work with colleges in the NCAA to look for athletes finishing college who might be good in weightlifting.
Right.
And we've had a couple of really good successes already in a very short period of time. And we'll see how they progress. What we do is we essentially recruit them, work with them a little bit, and then push them to coaches in the field. So
tell me about who are some of those people? I saw one guy, I believe I heard from somewhere that he was recruited by you guys. I'm not sure of his name. His Instagram handle is Grip and Rip.
That's
incredibly strong thrower. I think I saw him jerk 220 or 230 off the blocks. Phenomenally powerful guy. Is he one of your guys?
He is. So his challenge right now, and he knows this, so I'm not breaking any confidences, is getting down the technique. Kurt is tremendously strong.
Yeah.
He can jerk pretty much anything you want, but he's ultimately got to get the technique to the point where it needs to be. He's doing in the 330 range in a total in a meet, which isn't bad. Yeah, that's okay.
But you're right. I mean, when you see him do it, it's very apparent that he has a lot more potential than what he's currently able to do.
He is, and it'll be somewhat down to Kurt on whether he really wants to make it happen.
Yeah.
There's obviously lifters out there who followed a similar path. For example, Mark Seam.
Sure.
Mark was although he has somewhat good links to weightlifting, he was a thrower. And you can show a progression from those numbers to the numbers you need to be at. However, you've got to be willing to put in the time and learn the technique more.
Yeah, of course.
Kurt's one of the strongest people I've met for sure, and I'm not trying to disparage Kurt in any way, but his challenge is not strength, it's technique.
Yeah.
So he's now got to go down and put that technique, and that's the challenge for a lot of older athletes, is that if you've come through a strength and conditioning program that's really good and it's used to getting you very strong, then your challenge is then to technically get the lifts right, especially the snatch, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
So it's that we're not just recruiting at the NCAA level. We're going out and identifying talent at the youth level and high school level. Actually, we're doing a huge online Strongest High School in America program
Oh, that
in
sounds
March.
good. Okay.
It's basically we're using a company called Launchpad 6, and they actually did the Youth Olympic Games qualification for, of all people, world dance sport.
Right. Okay.
So
I
if you
didn't
have
know
to
that was a sport, but okay.
there you go. It's in the Youth Olympics in Buenos Aires. So if you ever get the pub quiz question, at what point did competitions overlap between the world dance sport and weightlifting? You know the answer.
Well, I might be heading out to the pub later, so if that question comes up, I'll drop you a message.
There you go. So we're using that. So each person can go online, upload their scores, upload their video of that scores. A little bit similar to the CrossFit Open in that sense, and the CrossFit Liftoff. And we're using not just our traditional lifts, but also the power clean, the bench, and the squat. Why are we doing that? Because that's the most common used lifts in America, and allows us to see the most talent. So ultimately, whilst post-college athletes are great, and I don't want to take anything away from them. We had three NCAA men on our world team out of 8, and we had a number of women.
I'm trying to think who those men were. That would have been Wes, I guess.
Yeah, that's one. Go on, you got to get the other 2 now.
Gosh, all right. Let me come down. I mean, no one else in the 105s because I don't think Ian's been. 94s, Nathan, no. Did we have it? Oh, Colin Burns, possibly.
Yeah, that's 2.
Yeah,
he played football at the NCAA for University of Wisconsin Whitewater.
Right. 85s, we didn't have Jordan. 77s, Harrison's too young. 69, CJ's too young. Oh, was it 62 kilo Brian Reisenauer?
He was 56, but yes.
56. Oh, okay, yeah.
He wrestled for Minnesota State.
Oh, okay. So it clearly is a sort of an avenue that does work. It is successful.
It is, and our women. There was several, not necessarily NCAA athletes, but people who've come from different sports into weightlifting. And the talent is out there in the US for us to be successful. That's sort of where I'm my overriding point. If you look, CJ is a weightlifter since the day dot.
Yeah.
And he were lucky enough that him and Rayford Jones, his coach, were in the same place at the same time, and that his sister Crystal started weightlifting before he did.
Yeah, I saw that story. Yeah,
right. And then Harrison Morris was a gymnast. His story is that he saw his coach doing weightlifting, which is actually CrossFit. At the time he was doing it. And said, "Oh, I want to give that a try." And now he's Harrison Morris. Yeah. Well, he was already born Harrison James Morris, to be totally fair to him and to his parents. But he's now he's added the to the front, like the Ohio State University. So he really came from gymnastics, and that's obviously at the age we'd love to see people coming in, 13, 14.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there is still a space for post-college athletes. We've had a diver just this past couple of weeks go to their first meet.
Wow.
And they're 22, and they're already doing numbers that were better than our national team members in the same category in their first meet.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's amazing.
It's great to see, and we'll see if that progresses. Ultimately, it comes back to the same thing as Kurt. Are the athletes willing to put in the time and effort in medium weightlifting to really become a world-class weightlifter?
Sure.
And that becomes the question with any recruitment activity. But ultimately, one of the reasons you've seen the US team get better is because we've seen more talent come in. Yeah. It's my firm belief that this is not taking anything away from either athlete because they're both phenomenal, that CJ Cummings and Harrison Morris benefit from each other.
Yes,
being in the same country at the same time, at the same age, doing similar numbers. And I think that's pushed both of them to be a little bit better.
Yeah.
Both in terms of strength and technically.
Yeah,
so
certainly, yeah. I mean, I think over the last few years, CJ was the guy, and I remember saying maybe a year ago to people that they needed to watch out because Harrison was about to overtake CJ. And I had a few people still who didn't really even know who Harrison was, and I think it's kind of safe to say that he's jumped above CJ to some extent in his lifting, but I mean, CJ's competing, as far as I know, I think he's going to the Arnold next week. So we may even see from him that he's, back up there with Harrison, maybe even overtaking him again. So, but I totally agree that having those two side by side has done wonders for the sport. But I worry that people kind of put all of their hopes into these two guys, and to some extent, I want the people to realize that in many ways these two are flukes, that we found them, or that you found them, or that they were found. There was neither of them were scouted, as far as I know. It just happened that they very fortunately at the same time turned up.
That scouting program, for want of a better terminology, is really new. We're talking 6 months.
Right.
So we won't see results from that in reality for a year or maybe more.
And that's what people need to have patience and understanding with, I think.
That's right. And we're doing high school combines now, and we've found about 6 or 8 athletes out of that which have some potential, some of whom are as young as 9 or 10.
Wow.
You've got some level. We did some up in Alaska and found some really good gymnasts. And gymnasts is always a good transition into weightlifting. Brian Riesenauer was a gymnast before he was a wrestler in college.
Oh, right, okay.
But many of our women's team, Mary Peck was a gymnast at Sac State.
Yeah.
Maddie Rogers was a gymnast before she was a cheerleader and then a weightlifter.
Yeah.
The Alyssa Ritchie did track and field and gymnastics, which means she's that's a surefire. Exactly. So it's and then if you look at Alpha Barbell, which is Kevin Simon's team, that's the same team as Harrison Morris. That's actually based within Auburn Gymnastics.
Right.
So what's happening is the people are doing both weightlifting and gymnastics with Alpha Barbell and Auburn Gymnastics, and we're seeing some great talent come out of that gym with a phenomenal coach.
Yeah,
but you're entirely correct.
Yeah, I've heard Kevin Simon say that he has a few new guys who are phenomenal. Someone, I think it was a young girl who's earmarked as being potentially kind of as good as Harrison was.
Yeah, he's got some really young ones as well, where I think that's probably the ones that he is referring to.
Yeah.
But the ones that I'm talking about is like Catherine Estep, who's actually now held a Youth American record.
Wow.
There was Noelle Torres Strickling was actually started by Kevin. She did really well at the Junior Nationals this past weekend. Didn't quite make the youth Pan Am team, but she came pretty close, given that she's 14 and that's a 17-year-old team. So, and she's not actually 14 yet.
Oh wow.
So that we've got some. I don't want to overshadow the phenomenal recruitment efforts of our coaches and the growth of our sport with what we're doing in the high school and college space. But what did happen with Harrison and CJ is somewhat the impetus for those recruitment programs, because we know and can prove the talent is out there. We got such good luck with the fact that Ray Jones was in the right place and the right school in the country to find CJ Cummings. Yeah. And we got, frankly, a similar amount of luck that Harrison happened to be from Auburn, Washington, and that Kevin Simons happened to have started CrossFit.
Certainly,
those two things coming together, that we found Harrison Morris, and actually we found Kevin Simons through the same experience, who's turned into this phenomenal coach, that we got those two athletes into our system. Similarly, that Danny Camargo found and recruited Maddie Rogers into weightlifting.
And these coaches are very much developed alongside their athletes.
I would say that's probably true.
I think certainly with Kevin Simons.
Certainly, Kevin is definitely the shining example of that.
Yeah.
There's others where Ray was around for quite some time before that. He's been involved in the sport for several decades.
Right. Wow.
Danny was a world junior level lifter for us.
He was, yeah.
Olympic Training Center resident. Already, I think, a pretty good coach of athletes for Team Florida Altamonte Springs, as it was, and now Team OC. I think certainly, though, Kevin Simons is a great example of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we've certainly seen coaches generally come out, and more coaches and developing coaches. Dane Miller's another great example of Garage Strength. He came through around the same time as Kevin, and hasn't had quite Harrison Morris, but he has coached one of the youngest ever female in the U.S. to clean and jerk double body weight, Haley Reichardt.
Oh, okay.
So Haley and Megan have been our two leading junior and youth 48s for a while. Actually, the funny thing is, their first national competition in 2013, they placed third and fourth against each other in the 53 kilo category. But Dane, similar to Kevin, has been someone who's come through recently, having found, in his case, Haley's brother Tanner, and then really developed as a coach off the basis of one athlete and then recruited more. So, the biggest reason that we've grown is actually the recruitment efforts of our coaches in the field, really.
Right, okay.
More than ours. Hopefully we're able to add to that. But I want to emphasize that, the reason we have those guys is because of the efforts of Kevin Simons and Ray, and somewhat the luck that those athletes happen to be in the same cities as those guys. If they're in like Plains, Kansas, which is a city that's almost equidistant between Denver and Kansas City, and I say that because we've got a couple of high school kids there. We're trying to figure out how we help them.
Oh, right. Okay.
But if they were there, we don't know about them. Yeah. We don't know, nor does Kevin know about Harrison, nor does Ray know about CJ. And they've got other talented athletes, and they would have probably risen as coaches as it was. But those particular examples are actually why it's really important for us to ensure that we don't go, great, we've got Harrison, we've got CJ, and then perhaps you include Maddie Rogers in that camp. You might include Maddie Myers. But certainly, the two world champion, world record holder athletes who are still young, want to mention Sarah Robles in that conversation, of course, since she is the current world champion, current Olympic medalist, but she isn't 17 years of age. But I think what that shows us is that talent is out there in the United States, that we have to continue as a group, not just us as USA Weightlifting, but our coaches in the field, to find those nuggets of gold and then give them the training and technique that they need to be successful.
Sure.
And that's where the partnerships between Morris and Simons and then Cummings and Jones, with honorable mention to his brother Omar Cummings.
Yeah, who is an underrated athlete in of his own right.
Yeah, it would be probably fair to say he's someone in CJ's shadow.
Yes. I almost felt bad for him. If he wasn't the brother of CJ Cummings, he would have been a spotlight athlete for a few years.
Yeah, Omar is a phenomenal athlete. He's playing football on a scholarship right now, and we certainly hope to welcome him back to weightlifting in time. Omar is exceptionally strong. He was a world youth medalist.
Was he a world youth medalist? I thought he was a Pan Am medalist. Wow, even better.
You may be right. I think he did win a medal logically he did win a medal at Pan Am Youth, but he certainly won a world youth medal. Yeah. And he's a really, really good, talented athlete who just happens to have a brother named CJ Cummings.
Yes, exactly.
So it's on a related note, I keep trying to talk Kevin and Tracy Morris, which is Harrison's mom, into getting his siblings into weightlifting. They have varied interests, and I'm sort of half teasing on that.
Yeah.
But
half serious at the same time.
Yeah, but if it happens, I'm not going to be opposed.
Yeah.
But it's we have to continue to look for that next generation as Harrison and CJ pass through their 20s and then their 30s. There's no question if they stay fit, they're going to be our leading athletes or amongst our leading athletes for many years. And keeping them healthy is going to be key to that. But, if you look at athletes we've had come before that, we've had Oscar Chaplin, we've had Cheryl Howarth, we've had Kendrick Farris, and Harrison and CJ, I would say, are probably... Cheryl's different because she's a different gender, two, because she's a completely different weight category. Her numbers for her age are just unreal.
Yeah.
And it's I think as Cheryl Howarth is reasonably underrated for how good she was for the year 2000 right up until she retired. But getting back to the guys' side, Oscar and Kendrick were unbelievable, and Kendrick's case still is an unbelievable athlete. But these guys are definitely on their tail. And,
for sure. Yeah, I think Oscar still holds a few records which are almost... I think his 85-kilo snatch record is going to be the hardest one to break. I'm not sure... Well, it might take a while before Harrison gets to it, but I think in terms of the clean and jerk with Kendrick, he's going to have the 85 record soon. And I would agree with you. I think they are probably ahead of where Oscar and Kendrick were at that age.
Yeah, and I'm not trying again. That's more saying we have these two phenomenal athletes, Oscar Chaplin and Kendrick Farris, and these guys are up in that same category, or perhaps better.
Yeah,
and that's going to be interesting for us to see how they develop. And they're also, I think, it's fair to say they're an inspiration to younger generations coming through, and continuing to recruit those younger generations is really key for us. And for our coaches and athletes in the field to continue to recruit athletes into weightlifting is key for us to continue to rise. We just named our junior world teams this morning after the junior nationals, and it's really pleasing to see the athletes coming through onto that team. And where the way we name a team is based on history of where you would place in the junior worlds. Or in the senior worlds or in the youth Pan Ams or what have you. And it's really pleasing to see, pretty much all of the team in the top 6, maybe top 7.
Wow.
With I think 5 of them in the top 5 predicted placement, which may rise because the country is facing the year-long suspension from the IWF for doping will not be at the junior worlds this year.
Yeah.
So for me, we're going into junior worlds with an expectation of doing very well, and that's where we ought to be every time. That's where our organization needs to be, where USA Weightlifting should be. We're the 3rd most successful team on the planet in history, behind China and the USSR stroke Russia.
Oh, really?
Yes, in Olympic history, World Championships history. So
it's been a while, but it's picking back up.
It's been a while. But that shows that we can do it. That shows that we can win. Harrison and CJ, as well as Sarah and Maddie, show that we can win medals at the world level, show it can be done, show that when we have the right athlete and we have the right coach combination, that Team USA can compete at the world level and be world relevant. And ultimately, that's what we're here to do. And that's what we're here to. Team USA is here to win and not to just simply participate. And that's where we need to continue to drive towards and not rest on our laurels that we have some phenomenal athletes in our pool right now. We concentrate a lot on Harrison and CJ because of their numbers. But you look down, especially our women, and the depth of our women has just grown so much. And I want to make sure I mention that because I'm always super excited about how well our women's team are doing.
Absolutely. So I'd be interested to know when you have these guys who, not just CJ and Harrison. I mean, we have so many amazing athletes at the moment. Or I say I'm not an American citizen, but you've got a few. Sarah Davis was 6th place, I think. Well, yeah, she is phenomenal. She's doing very well. But how do you plan on? I mean, how do you support these athletes? I know stipends are a big thing. I remember hearing you saying that your stipends are actually very similar to a lot of other bigger sports. We have the best, the best stipend program in the U.S. Olympic movement. So explain that to the people, because I think people generally assume that stipends in America aren't great. You get a few $100s a month, and that's what you're there to live off. But things have changed. People like Harrison, I assume. Sarah Robles for sure are I'd imagine able to live off their stipends at this point.
They are. Look,
how does it work? And where do the bonuses and all of that sort of thing come in? Right.
So we have now. I want to caveat this with we're just about to see new Olympic qualification procedures and new weight categories, which may change what we do.
We'll get into that.
I've been very right. I am sure we will. But that might change the system we have to have in place.
Sure.
So we have a system that, similar to our selection system, is based on placement. And so if you're placing above the top 15 in the world as a senior, we guarantee you a stipend. If we don't have 8 athletes predicted to finish 15th in the world or better, we pay below that. So we pay a minimum of 8 athletes, which is a world championships team. 15th in the world was chosen because in the team qualification format, that's roughly where we need people to be in order for us to qualify full teams.
Okay.
So that's why it might change, because the philosophy of the IWF is changing.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right. We have people, in theory, you can earn up to about, in the $4,000 area.
A month.
Yes, a month per athlete. Obviously, to do that, you have to be predicted to finish number one in the world. Those placements as averages, so even though Sarah won the world, she's not necessarily right there. But we do have a number of athletes earning over 3,000 or 4,000 per month.
Right.
Plus, we do bonuses for world records. Plus, we do bonuses for medals in the junior and the senior worlds. And we also do a qualification bonus for that team qualification series.
Yeah.
So the Pan American Games, which for British listeners is really our Commonwealth Games.
Yeah, sure.
Where we're qualifying the amount of quotas to go to the Pan Ams. The amount of points you earned for Team USA will be commensurate with the amount of money that you receive. In other words, those who carry the water should receive the most payment for that water.
Yeah.
So that's where the philosophy is based on, is what do we need to qualify our biggest team, our biggest possible team for the Olympic Games, and then development funds down into the youth. So we spend, including prize money, and including now some additional commitment from the USOC. So the US Olympic Committee, additional to us, has put $1,000 for everybody finishing the top 8 in Anaheim, is getting $1,000 a month from the US Olympic Committee, additional to what we pay.
Okay.
So
that's not bad. So, I mean, that kind of begs the question, but to some extent you answered it there by saying it was the Olympic Committee. Where is the money coming from? Is it... I'm sure you get some for the Olympic Committee, but then have you got someone who is out there trying to develop relationships and sponsors?
We actually took a completely different approach.
Okay.
Most of the time when the US Olympic Committee pays a stipend, most NGBs say, okay, we're going to reduce our own stipend, and that funds part of our stipend. We did not do that.
Well, that's good to hear.
We said we already pay over $600,000, and we've budgeted $600,000. We do not see this as a budget saving. We see this as rewarding our athlete.
Yeah.
So what we did instead was that 100-something thousand from the U.S. Olympic Committee just goes from the U.S. Olympic Committee to the athlete.
It goes straight on top of whatever you do. You don't touch it. That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
We help set it up, obviously, but we negotiate it before the Worlds on behalf of athletes.
Yeah.
But that money goes straight out the USOC account and straight into Maddie Rogers' account or Sarah Robles' account or whatever. We don't touch that money at all.
Okay.
So our money is different to that. We receive about 1% of our funding from the US Olympic Committee. That's one of the lowest in the entire Olympic movement in the US. But you have to understand really why that is. You have to understand that the entire US Olympic movement is not funded by the government. So we don't have a UK sport that receives lottery money.
Sure.
And so we have to generate income ourselves. So how we generate income primarily is coaching education.
So it's from all your level 1, level 2 courses.
That's exactly it. So that's what really pays everything. That pays for everybody to go to international meets. That pays for everybody's stipends. We also have donations. We raised roughly about $70,000 in donations last year. So
that's not bad.
It's not bad. It's not movement leading.
No.
We have some really good donors, and we really appreciate them. We can always use more. Hint, hint.
Yeah.
But what we do is, unless you can, the way that 501c3 nonprofits work in the US is you can designate that for a certain program. So you might say that's going towards high school development.
Right.
Unless you do that, then what we do is we take all that money and put it straight into the stipend pot. There's our most common donors around $20. So probably roughly 12, 13 pounds.
Yeah.
They take that money and they put it into us, and then we take that money and we put it into the stipend program. We have sponsorship. We had a record year with sponsorship last year. It's not a big deal for us versus coaching education and membership.
Okay.
So that's not really the way that a smaller NGB like us raises money, that's typically the way that a US ski and snowboard, a US swimming, and maybe you put gymnastics into that area too. They raise a lot of money through that avenue. We're in the medium NGB area, along with people like fencing. Boxing would be a similar membership number to us. Water polo, field hockey. We tend to be in the area where we have a little bit of sponsorship, but we don't have an enormous amount of it.
Right.
And then there's the smaller NGBs who really don't have a lot of sponsors at all. They might have one or two from within the sport. But the biggest single thing, the reason we're able to pay those amounts is our membership growth. And if you think about each one of those members is paying $69 for their membership per year.
Yeah.
Unless they're a youth athlete or a junior athlete, then they're paying less. Then that adds up. And every time we do a coaching course, that is really the funding. That's really where it is. If the coaching courses went away in terms of the revenue they generate, we would be able to do a lot less.
Yeah.
With our funds, with our programs.
So I suppose if there are people listening who want to help pay Harrison's finances, I guess they just need to sign up and do a level 1. I mean, that's kind of an easy way, other than donating, that's actually going to help give you guys money to distribute where it's most needed.
Yeah, that's fair. And there's ways to obviously give money directly to Harrison, and I want to be conscious of Harrison's own sponsorship arrangements and what have you, because if your goal is to give money to Harrison Morris, call Harrison Morris.
Yeah, of course.
If your goal is to support Team USA, that's where we come.
Yes.
So that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, of course. So let's stick with USAW briefly before we kind of move out into the greater scope of weightlifting. Dimas, who obviously everyone knows listening, 3-time Olympic gold medalist, 4-time Olympic medalist, he now has a role in USAW. This question was asked by someone who wrote in, and it was something that I was going to ask as well. Firstly, briefly, what is his role? Although I'm sure a lot of people know, but how has he positively impacted USA weightlifting as of this point?
Do you know what he reminded at least me, and I can't speak for everyone else, is we go to win. We go to compete.
Yes, I've heard that. I've heard that from him.
And he... we'll talk about, we think this attempt should be the right one first and this attempt then. And he's going, how do you know that? Because what's the other guy done? So it's a little bit difficult to describe his influence, but his drive, his personality, who he is to some extent, but also his knowledge, his knowledge of how to win, and I've got to say, I've heard that from a lot of coaches and a lot of people, and I'm not saying just in weightlifting, I'm talking about in the British Premier League. I brought this player in because I knew how to win. I started my career in professional ice hockey and spent some time with the Coventry Blaze, and still to this day, try and find me a better coach in professional ice hockey than Paul Thompson, who's now at the Sheffield Steelers. And best of luck.
Well, you'll have to forgive me for not knowing any of those names, but I appreciate the sentiment.
Another time I can run you through it, but believe me, he's the best BT engineer turned coach in the history. And I learned a good deal from Tomo, but he's a phenomenal coach, and his chosen sport is ice hockey.
Yeah.
I've met very good coaches elsewhere. Tomo is someone who's been a big person I've learned from in the very early stages of my career, way before I was in weightlifting. But I always heard him, I brought in this athlete because they know how to win. Yeah. I brought in this assistant coach because they know how to win. And I always was like, well, it doesn't really matter. If they're a skilled hockey player, they're going to score goals.
Yeah.
And I never really understood what that meant until Pyrrhus walked in our room.
Right.
And he really has brought that mentality, I think, to not just our athletes, but also perhaps to us as an NGB. I think that's really important. He also can read a scoreboard like nobody else I've seen, and read the competition and the warm-up room really well. He's amazing in the back room, amazing. And so I think it's a combination of his knowledge, his background, who he is, the gravitas he brings, the fact he is Pyrrhus Dimas, and what he's able to get across to people in because he's Pyrrhus Dimas. There's a lot of the word that's coming to mind is intangibles that Pyrrhus has brought to us, who's been a really key part of how we now manage the competitions and also the attention that's being brought to the US team worldwide. Of your first question isn't, hey, what about Pyrrhus? What about this aspect or that aspect? Your first question, talking about Team USA, is Pyrrhus Dimas.
Yeah, even the fact that we're having this conversation is answers the question in many ways.
It kind of does.
Yeah.
And then he's also got input on our coaching education. We've just redone that. He's got input on how we're doing our camps. We redid that. How we manage competitions. We redid that. He's been a tremendous influence.
So by redoing the education system, is that the level 1, level 2, the questions that are asked, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and the education that we give, and it's not exclusively him. We also have Mike Gatone, who deserves a great deal of credit there. But Pyrrhus and Gatone are one of those great partnerships that they really complement each other with what they do. So I'm trying to think of a good equivalent. I'm for some reason I want to say Morecambe and Wise, but I don't really want to go that route. But it's one of those really good partnerships that Gatone has some skills and some areas of expertise that Pyrrhus doesn't. For example, many of people take our coaching course purely for coaching the Olympic lifts in a strength and conditioning format.
Oh, right, okay.
Mike was the strength and conditioning coach for, amongst others, the Chicago Bulls. As a result, he knows what he's talking about in that area. Pyrrhus doesn't. Pyrrhus has been is weightlifting. He knows how to train. Right. He knows to train a weightlifter for competition in weightlifting. And ultimately, that's our hope, is that when somebody leaves our coaching course, eventually we see them back at a competition coaching weightlifting.
Yeah, of course.
Regardless of where they might start on that Olympic weightlifting journey. But it's that's not necessarily just in coaching education, but everywhere, that they're bringing different aspects, I think, to what they do. Mike's also overseeing that recruitment project that we talked about earlier. Susie Sanchez, a former Olympic Training Center resident athlete and phenomenal professional, is overseeing the high school stuff. He's overseeing more the college end. But Mike and Pyrrhus have formed this really phenomenal partnership for us. Right. And by the way, let me just say, we are not perfect. I feel like I've been very positive about USA weightlifting. I think we've improved a lot. We won World National Governing Body of the Year, which is pretty phenomenal.
Wow.
But we're not there yet. We're still improving. We're still humans. We're still making mistakes. We're still learning as we go.
So talk to me. I mean, what have you done over the last year or two that either you regret or you think you've not worked hard enough in that kind of area?
I don't know if it's regret or not worked hard enough. I think there's ways we could have communicated better with our athletes at times.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's on me entirely.
Do you say that? Do you say it's on you because, as the head, you are kind of the last line of defense, or it was literally it ran through you and you made the error? What do you mean by it's on you?
One, everything that happens in USA weightlifting, I am responsible for.
Yeah. Okay. I'd agree.
And as a result, it doesn't matter who it was as a person within our organization, as the guy who is from what, using your phrase, the last line of defense. That's on me. Any mistakes that my team make, I usually could have overridden or helped with that mistake. Sure. And I did not. Yeah. So that anything that happens here ultimately is my responsibility, good, bad, or indifferent. Yeah. And so as a result, that's what I'm talking about.
I see.
I've always tried to communicate very openly, and you said earlier that I come across as very transparent, and certainly I try to.
Yeah.
Where I try to be is to be as proactive as I can.
Right.
And where my team tries to be as a result. So that's what I mean by it is entirely on me that if we, I think last year there was definitely some communication issues as we try to figure out how we do all of this. And now, we've put in, for example, a high performance newsletter every single month that goes from our performance team to all of our athletes and high level coaches. Yeah. I'm doing the same on a wider athlete basis and a wider coach basis. And just improves communication. People feel included. People know what's going on. And we have a lot going on. So that's really important. So I think that's one. I think a second is, I don't know if there's so many mistakes in the stuff that's more to do. I don't say that as a political answer. I think we had a really great year in 2017. But I think overall, we're not there yet. We are world champions for women now, subject to the completion of a doping control.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is phenomenal, but we're not
that
quite
is amazing.
Yeah, we came seventh for our men, which I think was great.
Yeah.
But we want to see that grow.
Yeah.
And all of the programs put in place ultimately are there to try to serve athletes, to try to make us better. And where they're not doing that, that's what we have to look at.
Yeah.
And where there's more that we can do, that's what we have to look at. And that's why we even have a suggestion box right in the front of our website for people to go, "Hi, I think this."
Okay.
So
because
ultimately, we do best when we listen to our membership and when we listen to each other.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate enough to be backed by an incredible board who are very open to trying new items and new things, to taking one or two risks, quite frankly. But they're also open to debate. And I'm actually quoting our chair, who posted something this morning, but I really liked it. Debate, a healthy discourse and healthy disagreement within those board meetings, and it's just great. That's we have to be together as a board of directors, as committees, as administrators here at USA Weightlifting in order to progress, and that's something that's really been a success factor. Again, I feel like I'm dodging the question of what went wrong last year, but there was a lot of things that went right. I just think that we're not over the finish line yet. We're not over 30,000 members, which is where I'd really like to be. Okay. We're not. We're at 27,000, or actually 26 and change, and that was a little less growth than we'd seen in the year previous. So would I like to see more of that? Yes,
for sure. Yeah.
Is our sport still thought of? So, funny enough, one of the success factors. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit.
No, go for it.
Is I was sent a letter which was addressed to Phil Andrews,
right?
USA Wrestling.
Oh, nice.
And I have that up on I have two things up on my wall immediately next to my computer.
Yeah.
And one is that because it was from the US Olympic Committee. Because when our sport, people can remember that we are not wrestling, we are in fact weightlifting.
Yeah.
That's when we've really seen success. And the other one is people who think things are impossible should not get in the way of people who are doing them.
Nice. I love that.
Because everyone has told us that weightlifting can't be successful in the US, that we can't be a world power in weightlifting, that we can't win medals in the Olympic Games or Worlds. Well, we've already ticked one of those things off.
Yeah.
Ursula Garza-Papandreou got a seat on the executive board through a phenomenal amount of campaigning and working together collaboratively with everybody. That's how Ursula was able to do that and rescued our reputation internationally, quite frankly, and she deserves a great deal of credit for that. In terms of the international, I guess, political world, and she's been able to therefore be a voice for us within that group, as has Piros, who's on that representing Greece. So you talk about international influence. We did a lot of things with that in 2017. Ursula was elected at the IWF elections to the executive board. We also have people on membership commission. We have people on the development commission. We have people on the women's commission, the chair, which is Ursula again. We have the chair of the athletes commission, which is Piros. So there's a lot of people. Piros doesn't technically represent the US on that group, but he's obviously involved with us.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who have a US focus. Now, when they serve the IWF, they serve the IWF. They don't necessarily serve USA Weightlifting. In the same way, when a coach is on our board, they serve USA Weightlifting and separate themselves from the interests of their particular club.
Sure.
So and our governance structure has been great in doing that. We also put in new bylaws last year, led by 7 of our membership in a group who collaboratively improved those bylaws significantly, to the point where the University of Colorado did a study and we came out second in the US. Of course, me being me, I was like, okay, so how do we beat track and field? So it's by the way, when you combine that with the same study done with national federations, you'll never guess that FIFA was number 1.
Right.
browse really FIFA. But FIFA made a lot of improvements to their governance.
Yeah, you'd be
after the
surprised.
Sepp Blatter, right?
Yeah.
After the Sepp Blatter issues, and that's
Right.
why.
I see.
So again, we've made lots of progress in areas which kind of never reached the surface like that, like the bylaws. We just redid our foundation bylaws last week. And I think that there's a lot of good things happening there. And as I say, people told us we can't be a influential country within the IWF, within international weightlifting.
And you're proving them wrong.
Yeah, and we, not me, we are proving them wrong.
Yeah.
People said our athletes can't win medals. Well, let me show you Pan American champions. Let me show you world champions. Let me show you world medalists.
Yeah.
Let me show you world record holders.
That's awesome.
And that's, again, it's not me, it's we. And we're showing a lot of progress as USA Weightlifting in a lot of areas. And I, as you can hear, I'm tremendously passionate about that, because there's one easy way to try and get me to do something, which is tell me it can't be done. And I think our entire organization, I don't just mean the people I work with every day, I mean our athletes and our coaches have kind of got that focus too of, all right, we're going to prove the US can do this. We're going to prove the US can be one of the leading nations in the world. And we're not there yet, but we're on our way.
Well, you're on a bit of a roll and you started tasting success, and it just sort of, it just keeps rolling and it builds momentum. And I've kind of seen it with some of your coaches and athletes, just the way they're talking about expectations that they now have. Everyone kind of has this sense of belief that the USA can be the top team for men and women in the coming years.
I think that's right. And the other thing is we have to, I'm going to steal a phrase from Sir David Brailsford from British Cycling of progress, not perfection. And that's been something of a mantra since we learned that from David. And trying to progress each time, trying to get to perfection, but we're realizing we can't get to perfection right off.
Well, he did an amazing job with British Cycling.
Yeah, and we actually went over to see him, or I sent Mike and Lance, two of our high performance guys, over there to see him, and also Dr. Steve Peters, who was responsible for the psychology side. And they also met with British weightlifting while they were over there, and had a good. They were there for something like a day and a half. But it was really nice to see and learn from somebody who's done what we're trying to do, which is take a sport from middle of the pack would be fair, to top, and really overtook many of the other sports within Britain doing that, like rowing, for example. It's still a good sport, but they really upped their stock within the GB Olympic movement in the same way that you're seeing, and they're arguably the number one. In the same way, we're definitely not number one yet. That's I think without a shadow of a doubt in the summer sports, that's USA Swimming from a performance standpoint. But we're definitely upping our stock with the way that weightlifting is viewed within the US Olympic movement.
Sure. Great. Well, Phil, let's zoom out a little bit, because I realize we're on 50 minutes, and unlike me, most people can't spend their whole days podcasting about weightlifting. So I know at some point you are going to have to leave. So let's tuck into one of the kind of the big topics at the moment, which is the restructuring of the weight classes. This has, as we know, happened a couple times throughout the history of weightlifting, but this time it's a little bit different because, from what we know, I believe this has now been stated by the IOC. There are going to be two different. There's going to be a set of weight classes for the Worlds, that kind of thing. There's going to be a new set of weight classes for the Olympics. As someone who is involved deeply in all of this stuff, and who I imagine has heard some discussion and whispering behind closed doors, do you have any kind of insight into this stuff that we don't know, or any predictions perhaps for weight classes to come?
Honest answer, no, I don't know. It's something I get asked pretty much every day.
Okay.
I have my own wishes, if you like.
Suspicions, yeah.
Well, not necessarily suspicions, but where I'd like to see.
Okay.
But you have to bear in mind that that's a US-centric view.
You're going to want slightly heavier weight classes, a 115, I'd imagine, yeah.
Well, in the men, yes. In the women, we're actually spread pretty well throughout, but I'd like to see, if I was just thinking as a US person from performance standpoint, I would probably like to see in a weight category in the 80s because we have a really deep 75 right now.
I think
but
even
we might not have that
85 and a 95, I think would be quite nice for the women.
Maybe.
I don't know if that's
And
possible, but you know.
From a numbers standpoint here in the US, we have a concentration in 63 and 69 domestically. So something that sort of puts another weight category in there would be very pleasing for me domestically.
Sure.
Not necessarily internationally, although we do have a cluster of very good athletes at both of those weight categories. Myers, Sasser, Biber, obviously Rogers.
Yeah.
And Meredith Allwine at the junior level as well. You've got the quality of athletes that we're not sending to international championships in those two categories is quite impressive.
Yeah.
So it's I was, for example, at the junior nationals, we had Erin Amos do 200 at 63, and she's actually a reserve.
Wow.
So I'm going.
Yeah, amazing.
Wow. I mean, I saw 200 in a junior at 63 and just automatically assumed she'd be on the team.
Yeah.
But no, sure enough, when we did the rankings, off of the back, she's in the reserves. I say off the back is a little unfair, but we have Kate Vibert who's doing in the 205 to 210 range.
She's been on the podcast before. She's amazing.
Yeah, and she's going up to 69 and for the junior worlds, and I think that's a very, very smart decision for Kate and her coach Josh Galloway. I apologize, Josh. I haven't had my first coffee of the day. That's my excuse.
Understandable. Yeah.
So myself and I know Ursula gets this question literally every single day. What are the new weight categories?
Yeah.
We genuinely have no idea.
You don't know.
So the IWF asked by the end of January, I think it must have been January, to receive proposals from federations across the world.
Right. Okay.
From that data, they also asked for data on who lifted in what body weight category at what event domestically. So, in other words, total people lifting in each weight category in your federation.
Oh, so they're trying to work out some kind of mean distribution of how everything works around the world, so they can come up with the best. Because obviously, I mean, they're gonna look at a sort of like a graph of where people generally are, and then split it. So you're not going to find that you can easily make 10-kilogram jumps, because at both extremes of weight, the lighter and the heavier people, there are going to be fewer people. So there has to be some kind of concentration of classes in the middle range where the majority of the world tends to be.
Well, and I think honestly, I don't know is the quite serious answer, because there's also other elements to that that decision. Okay. For example, how many people lifted in the 75 kilo category is one number. How many people lifted in the 90 kilo category is another. Well, how do you know how many of them would have lifted in a hypothetical 85 kilo category?
Sure.
So that's your challenge, is that, let me be clear. Whenever those are decided, and we hope to we know that they're going to be approved in July at the Congress, but we'll probably know something more before then. We in the US are implementing them in September at the American Open Series 3 nationally, and from September 1 on the local level. But let's be clear, somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And that might be domestically, that might be internationally. You might see a whole country get hurt. Let's say if the 56 kilo category disappears, if I'm the Vietnam Weightlifting Federation, I'm not particularly happy. If I'm Brian Riesenhauer domestically, I'm not very happy, or Michael Fox.
Yeah.
So that's where we have to be conscious. There'll be winners and losers. Some in how those weight categories redone in every country, and to some extent entire countries.
Yeah.
We have to also be conscious that there will be winners. That there will be some people for whom, like we just talked about Kate. Kate may go up to 69, but if a 67 weight category shows up, well, that's going to be very good for Kate.
Yeah.
So it's Derek Johnson's other one that comes to mind, cuts down to 62.
If there's a 65, that might be about right. Yeah.
63, 64, 65. I haven't spoken to Derek about it, but I'm sure he'd be pretty happy to see certainly 63, 64.
Yeah.
So there's going to be winners and losers in that weight category selection. And our challenge as an organization is to figure out how we put the best teams forward, and how we work out essentially where those numbers will go mathematically, or which is going to be somewhat hypothetical, because we can only use the data we've got.
Yeah.
to select our Ashgabat team for November. And GB is going to face the same problems. Brazil's going to face the same problems. Colombia's going to face the same problems. We're all in the same boat. And sending 10 people obviously will put an additional financial strain on some national federations, including ourselves.
Sure.
Not every national federation always sends a full team. We typically do, and we try to open up those opportunities. So that's our challenge, is figuring out how we do that going forward.
Right.
In terms of the weight categories, no real idea of where we're going with that.
Yeah.
I am just as much waiting with bated breath and figuring out every scenario in my head.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that will be decided at the IWF level, not the National Federation level. I truly appreciate that they've asked us for input. And we gave two, as the US, we gave two views. One was a cut and dried statistical analysis done by a mathematics professor, and one was more of a general, we think this is going to be the easiest way to implement it.
Yeah.
I don't think either of those will necessarily be taken forward as direct proposals. And it will all go into the melting pot together with what GB proposed, with what Japan proposed, with what Russia proposed, with what Australia proposed, what South Africa proposed, and so on and so forth.
So who is it in the USA who's going to write the proposal? Who decides?
Well, what we did is we asked Dr. Meltzer, who's a mathematics professor. For those who are masters weightlifters, you're familiar with the name.
Okay.
And he looked at it from a purely mathematical standpoint.
He just got a mean distribution of the weightlifters in the US and then worked out what are the best weight classes.
Correct.
Okay.
And he actually looked internationally as well as domestically. And what from a mathematical standpoint purely makes sense. And there was some of those where I thought, oh, that'd be a great result, and some of those where I thought, not so much.
Interesting.
But
yeah.
It was a purely objective mathematical view. The other way that we went with it was to look at what's easiest, given the timeline, which is basically moving everything up a kilo or two. And again, what the IWF did was ask for input, not necessarily saying what the US puts in is what's going to happen.
You. Yeah.
Yeah, they asked for, what is your proposal, dear every national federation. Every national federation had the opportunity to do that, not just the US.
Yeah.
And I think that's where let's give IWF credit where IWF credit is due. That's a very open and welcoming process. And they've done that pretty consistently, especially with the eyeballs that's been on anti-doping. They've asked for input in the same way we do. We're asking our members for ideas.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate, especially Attila Damfi and Dr. Damashayan for backing that, and for really going and saying, look, we don't want to do this just in an ivory tower on our own. We want to find out what everybody thinks.
Yeah.
And see if we can come to something that at least pleases 80% of federations. And that's a tough ask. It really is, because there will be winners and losers in this process. And there'll be winners and losers domestically and internationally. And I'm sure that when it comes down to really looking at that stuff, it's going to be a very tough decision to make.
Yeah.
A really tough decision to make. But what's going to happen is once that decision's made a year later, you're going to have settled into the new weight categories, and that will be weightlifting.
Yeah.
Weightlifting will be the 10 categories.
Yeah.
Weightlifting will be 7 Olympic categories. And we all are dying to know them. We are.
Yeah.
But once they're here, that becomes the new weightlifting. That becomes the new sport.
You're right. I mean, the last time they were changed, I'm sure there were people who said these are awkward weight classes, but then 5 years later, everyone filed their way into them, and it's going to be the same thing again. Yeah. 100%.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
It strikes me as a shame that so many of these world records, and this has happened before, they're going to be wiped. And I always try and do a good job with my social media of reminding people of some of the amazing lifts that have happened in previous eras of weightlifting. But I do hope that a lot of these records aren't forgotten, especially, there are some USA records that stand now. Shane Hammond's snatch record comes to mind that are going to be forgotten to some extent, and that's a real shame because they are so far ahead of of what a lot of people hit now.
And we've already decided how we're going to treat that. We're going to send each individual commemorative plaque of their record.
Oh, that's nice.
And when we close down those records at the end of July,
yeah.
The last national competition, it's possible to set them, the American Open Series 2, for everyone, right down to 13 and under.
Nice.
And we're also going to create a records archive on our webpage to make sure those records are not forgotten.
Okay. Actually, I only just thought this as we're talking, but I know that when this has happened before, they set a new world standard, which is basically the new world record that you have to hit. With USA Weightlifting, are you going to pick, or not you necessarily, but is someone going to pick records that or weights that until they are hit, no one has got a national record?
That's our plan. We currently did that with the 90 kilo category, and we use a process called interpolation, which is actually what the IWF have done, generally speaking, historically.
It's a nice long word, so I trust that it probably works.
Right. And again, you look at doing it from a mathematical basis.
Yeah, sure.
What is a number that makes sense? What's a number that makes a number that works for that record based upon what people have done in the weight categories above and below and their body weights. And basically what we came to for the 90 kilo, we did the same thing for our selection, was 7 kilos above the 75 kilo category.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you look at where our predicted placement for people we selected versus the outcome, that actually proved pretty accurate, given it's completely based on a mathematical formula versus actual lifting data.
Sure.
I was pretty impressed. So it wasn't quite as accurate as actual lifting data is, but it's that process proved pretty well to be accurate with where people would place given a certain number that they were lifting.
Yeah.
So we'll do the same thing with the American records. Obviously, it's going to take us a little bit longer, because we're now having to redo so many records. I don't know we'll necessarily do that in the Masters division, but we'll certainly do that senior, junior, youth.
Right.
And use the IWF weight categories to do that. Internally, we use different 14 to 15 and 13 and under categories, the lighter.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have a challenge to make sure that we know what we're doing there.
Yeah.
So there's a number of pieces of work that we have to do once we know those categories, and I'm sure that other federations are in the same boat, which is, 1, how do we select teams? 2, how do we distribute stipend funding in the new bodyweight categories? How do we do American records? We know how we're doing that. And how do we do those new youth bodyweight categories? So we've made as much plans as we can of what we're going to do, but there's a lot of work to do.
Well, again, this is something I wasn't going to get into, but let's talk about that. How you select teams, because there are so many different measures by which you select a team. And it seemed like for the World Championships last year, there were a few people who weren't happy with the somewhat subjectiveness of the final decisions being made. I know a few people were upset that D'Angelo didn't get a shot. How are you planning to select teams from now? Is it going to be percentage of world record? Is it going to be predicted placement? Is it just going to be who's hit the biggest total on stage? I mean, how do you plan on doing that?
Honest answer right now, we don't know.
Okay.
I think from my mind, and actually we have a board of directors meeting in March where we'll be looking at somewhat of a priority list of what are our priorities when it comes to this, because I think we've got to know the bodyweight categories before we can do much else.
Sure.
I think the first thing we've got to look at is Olympic qualification. And getting people to the Olympic Games. That's number 1.
I suppose, that is the most important thing, and whatever's going to score the most points, even if it potentially is upsetting to some people, maybe that is the thing that has to be prioritized.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So that's exactly why our selection procedures read as they do.
Okay.
Even though it wasn't an Olympic qualifier, we have a selection committee which looks at who is the best 8 to put on the platform, because they're going to score the most points for Team USA.
Right.
So,
and does that take into account how they've done in previous performances?
Somewhat, yes.
Okay.
And so that's where we are today. However, we're moving to a system which is based on in personal qualification, not group qualification. So it becomes less important to be a team championship. Right. Does that make sense? So one of the debates that we're having internally is, we still need to look at whether people are in shape that rank them. We still need to look at people's health and their fitness to lift. We still need to make sure that people are on the right body weight. We still need to do all of that. But because it's no longer critical to our Olympic or Pan American Games qualification or Youth Olympic Games qualification, because that's now flipped to a personal qualification, it now becomes more important to focus on who is the closest, or who is the most able to go to the Olympic Games, versus who is in the whole team. So that may or may not go away, but it becomes, from my personal opinion, a little less important than it was before. That doesn't mean we're getting rid of it for sure, but it means it's certainly open for debate. Okay. We like I say, it might be that we need a different sort of group. It might be that we need a group that is just double, an oversight committee, or it might mean that we just go down to a very straight up qualification regimen. One of the challenges is you have to compete 6 times to go to the Olympic Games, which means we can send 20 athletes 6 times. Okay. So we've got to figure out who gets sent where and with what funding, and how those teams are determined. And for me, it makes a lot of sense to look at how someone gets to the Olympics and how we best support that individual to make to the Olympic Games. So I guess where I'm coming down to is world ranking as we go forward will play a significant part, versus
who hit the biggest total, or
well, not necessarily who hit the biggest total. That should be commensurate with world ranking.
I guess, I mean, if you've got someone who is particularly strong in the 77 kilo weight class worldwide, but isn't actually as good as the 85 kilo lifter, but the 85 kilo lifter is in a tough category worldwide, you might take the 77 because he's got a better chance of placement.
Well, that's already what we do, because our rankings are according to place and score. So in other words, if you're going to place 5th in the 77s, then we're going to take you over the 10th placed 85. And that's trying to send the best group. And I think we'll use something probably similar to that.
Okay.
But ultimately, our goal becomes, how do we get 4 men and 4 women to the Olympic Games? And how do we ensure that they get their 6 qualifiers to get to that Olympic Game? So that's what we've got to craft our selection procedures around. We need to make sure we're not excluding somebody who might have 5 qualifiers and they need 6, and might be the best shot at a medal at the Olympic Games. We also need to make sure that everybody's got an opportunity to get those 6 qualifiers. And we've got to make sure that we're sending the right people to the right competitions to get the world ranking. So it becomes a little bit more complex. We just don't have enough information to make those decisions yet. But coming to your selection committee point of the D'Angelo case, we ultimately we're looking at it, and we're looking at whether that makes sense going forward. And I think the answer to that is probably it makes less sense going forward, because we're no longer reliant on team scoring to make the Olympics. So the whole selection procedure with that in it was predicated on being able to put the best 8 out there to score team points.
Okay.
Now we're still looking for the best placement, but it's much more individual. So it's the people at the top end of the team are obviously the ones who are most likely to go to the Olympic Games, because ultimately you're looking for people in the top 12 in the weight category. So those are the individuals who are most likely to occupy the slots going to the games. Because they have the biggest totals, the highest placement.
That will make sense,
So it becomes less of a need, and therefore, it might make a much more sense for us to move away from that type of selection that we had into a more world ranking based qualification. That's not to say I have all the answers yet. That's not to say that's been approved or well documented yet. It's to say that's the way that we're thinking. I think it's the way our board's thinking. I think it's the way our sports performance team's thinking, because it becomes less necessary on the team side.
Okay. Now, Phil, please do stop me at any point if you need to get going with anything. If you have a few more minutes. Okay, great. I'd love to just mention the name Ilya Ilyin, talk a little bit about him. Now, I know you know all this, and I've spoken about this on the news show before. Your sigh speaks volumes. I appreciate that. What are your thoughts on this? Because, I mean, you may be restricted to some extent with what you're allowed to say, but it seems to me like, and I'm a huge Ilya fan, and I find myself sat on the fence between wanting to see the guy compete again and knowing that really the IWF is probably making a really dumb decision here. And It seems to me that what they're doing is they're saying, and I've used this analogy before, it's like if someone murdered someone and then a year later they murdered someone else, but they weren't told in between, you've done something wrong, so we're only going to charge you with one murder. That's kind of how this is coming across to me. What's going through your head with all of this stuff?
Well, my side does tell you a lot. Let me be clear. I am not an Ilya Ilyin fan. If you doped twice in our sport in the Olympic Games, if you're a fan of our sport, you should not be a fan of Ilya Ilyin.
Okay.
And that's full stop. Why? Because Ilya Ilyin, along with others who doped in those two Olympic Games, very, very, very close to having our sport eliminated for the Olympic Games.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
So it's an exceptionally short-sighted view to be an Ilya Ilyin fan. In fact, frankly, my personal view is something I should keep to myself, but it's not positive on those individuals or the individuals who supported them.
Right.
I am also, though, happy to work with people who have a genuine wish to change and a genuine wish to compete clean and to change the way that their systems or their own training is working. And I know that's a view shared by many clean countries around the world. Let's all get better together. Let's all change our culture together.
To some extent, though, do you think that what he did and by him getting caught twice is not such a product of him being someone who wanted to dope as it is the system in which he was brought up?
It may be a bit of both.
Okay.
It's either both or either.
Yeah.
The answer is we have no legitimate proof either way. We have certainly our own conclusions we might draw, but the reality is we have no legitimate proof either way. But what I'm saying is I'm happy to see and work together with federations and individuals who want to change, who want to compete clean, who want the sport to stay in the games, because that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Is that if we do not clean up our sport, we will not stay in the Olympic Games.
I think people don't realize quite how close we came and still maybe are to not being in future Olympic Games.
We came very, very close. We were on the brink. And there was a long while where I thought we would be removed from the Olympic Games in December, and I have to give a lot of credit to quite a lot of people, but especially Attila at the IWF, who really led the charge to keep us in the games.
Right.
There's two elements to that, it's both political and the technical. He really led the technical side. And if you look at what the IWF put into place with the Anti-Doping Commission, or the Clean Sport Commission, I should say, it's really pretty damn good. And they had the right people involved in that. They had the Canadians involved, they had the Germans involved, they had national federations, they had NARDOs, they had the guy who wrote the WADA code. So it's literally was the chair of that commission, Richard Young. So they got involved people who really know what they're talking about, people who've helped the UCI clean up, people who know what it's like to be a clean federation competing. Sure. They really did a great job of putting into place measures to keep us in the games on the Clean Sport Commission side and the underrated side, which is the sport program side too. And those are still ongoing projects, and we've got to prove to the IOC that we're implementing those recommendations of the Clean Sport Commission in June. And I think that's fair on behalf of the IOC, and it's achievable on behalf of the IWF. But that is actually, if you look at other international federations, I'm not talking about USAW or UKAD, and the way we work domestically. I'm talking about the way international doping control is done. The IWF is arguably now one of the leading federations in the way that they're proposing to do doping control, with one of the toughest problems to crack. Let's be clear. They have a huge problem to crack.
Yeah, for sure. So how are they planning on going ahead to become this, stringent doping?
Well, that's why you've got to compete 6 times, because you've got to be eligible for drug testing.
I was going to say that did seem like a a lot of times to be competing in a single quad.
Well, it's two things. It's an anti-doping measure first and foremost, and second, it means that you can't send one set of athletes to Worlds and a separate set to the Games.
Okay.
It means that you've got a CNET athlete 6 times in competition.
Yeah.
Before they go.
You can't hold an athlete back and just drug them to the gills while other athletes qualify that person, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they deserve a lot of credit. That was a tough decision to get to, and the IWF has received internally to the weightlifting world a lot of criticism. Mm-hmm. Frankly, some of which historically may have been warranted, but certainly now is not. They even turned around the view of the US Olympic Committee, who did not have a positive view of the IWF, I tell you that. And Scott Blackman, the CEO of the US Olympic Committee, showed up and openly, without my prompting, without my asking, without the IWF's asking, made very positive public comments about what our sport is doing.
Oh, wow.
And that was tremendously appreciated. So too Adam Pengili, who's on the WADA Athlete Committee and has just finished his term as an IOC member. He came to the Worlds and made similar positive comments. And we, together with the IWF and WADA and the Clean Sport Commission, I felt did a good job at the Worlds. But you have to understand that really comes down to the IWF. We were the minority partner in that, and we just happened to be hosting the Worlds this year.
Yeah.
So the IWF deserve a good pat on the back in the entire executive board as well, and over in your country, Dr. Irani, but for approving and backing those measures, which, by the way, include Kazakhstan and Russia on that board.
Right.
So I'm perfectly willing to see countries like Russia and Maxim Agapitov come to the table and say, look, we want to be back involved. Mm-hmm. We understand we've got to change what we're doing.
Yeah,
and that I think is where collaboration comes in.
Okay.
That's kind of where I'm at on the Ilyin side. On the suspension, the IWF did what the WADA code allows them to do. The WADA code might be wrong, but it did allow that to happen. The reason is because of the single notification rule. What that means is that basically the rule is designed not for tests that are 4 or 8 years apart. The rule is designed for tests that might be, let's say Ilya went to the Olympic Games and tested positive in August. Mm-hmm. That test takes a month or so to come through. And 2 or 3 weeks later, he's lifting in a competition in Germany, let's say, and is tested again, and that test also becomes positive. It's designed that the athlete must know in between the two that they were found in violation in order that they can be charged again.
Okay.
Of course, when that rule was written, nobody thought there's going to be the 2008 2012 Olympic Games, which subsequently test results of which will be announced in 2016. That's not a scenario anyone thought of. That rule in the WADA code prohibits the IWF from doing anything more.
And that's how Ilya and his lawyers kind of sneaked back in, I guess.
Correct. And the other issue you've got is that it's based upon the WADA code of the day. So because his tests were in 8 and 12, the band that's allowed to be given for a first offense is the ban that was available at the time. Well, the 4-year minimum only came in, I think it was January 1st, 2015. It may have been 14, but I'm pretty certain it was 15.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's why you're seeing people who've had a positive in the past be able to get 8 years. But those people who have 2 positives in in the 2 Olympic Games there are not able to be charged with double positives because of the way the WADA code is. And to understand how that works, you've got to understand how WADA, the IOC, international federations, national federations, and national anti-doping agency all interact. And to do that, in a very brief layman's terms, I would recommend the John Oliver episode on Last Week Tonight he did before the 2016 Games.
Yeah. Because
in about 5 or 10 minutes, he shows a web of these different organizations, which gives you a better idea of how it's not all as connected as you would think. You've got the Court of Arbitration for Sport, you've got WADA, you've got the IWF. In our case, you have USAW, you have the US Olympic Committee, you have USA Weightlifting. And you have laboratories, which are not necessarily part of WADA. They're WADA accredited. There's a difference. And does WADA do testing? No. WADA accredits testing.
Yeah.
Those are different things that you need to understand to fully understand the legalities that sit behind anti-doping and how anti-doping really works day to day. And that's where I think there's a lot of somewhat misconception out there about who's responsible for what and why can people do what.
Yeah.
So, I feel bad for the IWF in a way that they were kind of backed into a corner on this one. Do I want to see Ilya competing right away? I'll be honest, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy who tested positive twice for anabolics in the Olympic Games. And I'm now, we've spent several minutes now talking about his doping.
Yeah.
So and frankly, I have very little time for people who stood in front of our American athletes and your British athletes on the same platform and basically gone head to head claiming that they're clean when they're not. So it's for me, seeing the changes that we're making as a sport is tremendous. Seeing the changes the IWF are bringing in is tremendous. Seeing people who have previously had doping records in their country saying, okay, how do we do this clean?
Yeah.
Because we need to work together for the sport is tremendous.
Yeah.
The day that I can look an athlete in the eye and truly say, I believe you have an equal chance.
Yeah.
And then if we get beaten, that's on us.
Yeah. That's a good day.
Yeah, exactly. I'll happily take fifth place if the four people in front of us were competing fairly and equally with us.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting closer.
Yeah.
If you look at I think the message is starting to get across. If you look at the 17 Worlds, we had 4 positives on more tests. It wasn't that there's less tests. The easiest way to get less positive is to do less tests, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we did more tests on a higher percentage of people.
And got fewer pops.
Yeah, and we still got some pops. That
That's
shows
fantastic.
we're still doing the job.
Yeah.
As a sport, this is.
Now,
yes, somebody's going to say, well, weren't the countries banned who had severe doping records? There were, but that still shows progress.
Yeah. Now, can we go a little bit hypothetical and just say, I know you've only got a couple minutes left, but say there was someone who clean and jerked a world record in the 94 kilo class at Worlds, who some people might speculate to be on drugs. How does an athlete like that pass these tests that are more stringent?
Well, hopefully they don't. Or they do, and it was natural. That's where we want to be.
I mean, it's clear to everyone listening who I'm talking about, but he did set a world record and hasn't been popped, and I would not really want to go on record saying that I believe that he's a clean athlete. Is that some kind of corruption and deceit in the country with their relationship towards, or their relationship with the IWF? Or do they possibly have methods that we don't know about? Or do we just have to accept that this guy is clean and he's just light years ahead of anyone the USA, Britain, and anyone else in the world has ever produced clean?
Well, I think here's the first thing you've got to look at with that. Number one, corruption within this area is pretty much impossible at this point, because of all the eyes on it.
Yeah.
So, secondly, if you're talking about at that particular event, USAW did the testing, Montreal did the analysis.
Yeah.
It's going to be very challenging for you to pervert that course,
right? Because
there's too many organizations involved that are going to blow the whistle. Let's even say that your accusation against the IWF had any element of truth to it. It's almost impossible to do with the way it's set up. The other thing that's happening is we're outsourcing our testing to an independent testing authority. So as a result, those tests are going to be chosen on athletes who are chosen by not the IWF as it is.
Yeah.
But let me be clear. I don't think the IWF is corrupt.
Yeah.
Allegations in the past, okay. I wasn't there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But today, I've seen the inner working.
Yeah.
And it's not there. The second thing is, I believe the individual you're talking about is from Iran,
Yes.
who has not been, if you notice, Iran is not on the executive board, and they only have one seat on a committee. That tells you that Iran is not highly politically involved with the IWF as it is. And the second thing I'd say is if you look at the IWF's doping news, anti-doping news, they publicly announce provisional suspensions. There's been provisional suspensions whilst people have been on the executive board of Russia, and I believe of Kazakhstan. I might be wrong, but I believe so. And possibly other countries on that group also. I know certainly Russia has had one. I don't mean to pick on Maxim or the Russian Weightlifting Federation in doing that. But what it shows is the IWF is not afraid to take action against people and federations that are politically influential within the IWF. And let me be clear. We are amongst the leading group in the IWF because we have Ursula as a vice president, because we have a tremendous amount of representation on committees and commissions. If we had an international doping positive tomorrow, I would fully expect the IWF to take swift and decisive action against that individual. And against us as a federation also. So it's and against any federation, Britain, Germany, Italy, France, whomever, that it's very important that that happens. So ultimately, the new Clean Sport Commission recommendations include the ability to test athletes more often because they are competing more often and eligible for drug testing more. It also includes the ability to choose those athletes away from the IWF. So therefore, you have, even if that was a doubt in your mind, you have somewhat more comfort that can't happen. And that takes it out of, I can't comment on what NATO does. So, in this case, the Iranian Doping Control Organization or the regional version. We have a tremendous domestic anti-doping agency in USAW, which partners well with us on education and enforcement. And I know you do in England and UKAD. How do I know? I've been tested by them. So UKAD and USADA are both world class. But what we want to see is making sure when we go to a competition, we know those athletes are being held to the same standard that we are. And ultimately, you can't just say because you're from this country, you are doping. You really can't. There's a lot of people who could look at CJ or Harrison and go, wait a minute, you've got these enormous clean and jerks that are setting world records.
Well, believe me, I get messages every week from people asking me. They say, like, in all honesty, off air, what do you think? And I say, to be honest, I think these guys are clean. Like, I just do.
Well, and here's your comfort level that you can get to. Go to USADA.org. You can go to the testing records of every individual athlete from the United States and see just domestically, not internationally, how many of those athletes were tested, when, and how many, and how many times across the year.
That's cool.
And they publicize that for each athlete and for each sport. And that doesn't include when CJ might have been tested or Harrison might have been tested at things like Pan Am's, Worlds. CJ didn't go to Pan Am's, but he did go to World Juniors. Harrison did the opposite and went to the Pan Am's. And the other groups, the World's, World Youth, all of which were tested by different agencies. So, and in different labs. Cologne and Montreal are generally regarded as the leading labs in the world, and that's the two that the IWF usually designates their samples to be tested at. So that gives you a good overview of where anti-doping's at. But, ultimately, I certainly do not want to make an accusation against the athlete that you're talking about. And for me, okay, I'm willing to look at it. I'm willing to say, as long as you can show up 6 times in this Olympic quad and be tested, then we
have to accept that what you do is what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's
the culture we've got to change, is that we shouldn't automatically go to doping. We shouldn't automatically go to this person's doping or that person's doping. And equally, we shouldn't automatically go to the doping as a sports performance solution either. So, the time when we get to a point where we're not spending 41 minutes or so talking purely about doping control, we're starting to see success.
Right. Well,
And frankly, if CJ or Harrison gets to the top of the medal stand,
yeah,
I want everyone to go, good job.
yeah,
I don't want everyone to go, well, CJ or Harrison was doping because they won a medal.
yeah.
Let's all applaud
If
those individuals.
it's a flawed sport if the person who wins is immediately thought of as being someone who's on drugs because they won. If that's the case, then the sport is flawed, and it is something that needs to be changed, and it is something that is changing.
Right, exactly, and
Yeah.
that's it. It comes down to cultural change of the sport,
Yeah,
and culturally changing what we do as a group, as weightlifting, not as USA Weightlifting, not as the International Weightlifting Federation, as weightlifting, to make sure our sport stays the strong, beautiful sport it is and stays in the Olympic game. And that's on every single one of us.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a phenomenal place to stop. Phil, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to give you the final word if there is something that you want to mention. If not, I'll end the show there.
I'll finish this the same way that I finish every podcast, which is reach out, please.
Yeah.
We want to hear from you. We want to know what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. My email is phil.andrews@usaweightlifting.org. My cell is 719-200-6020. And you can go right onto our website and find any of our members of staff contact details in the same way.
That's awesome. You are the most transparent man, but also in the good way, if you know what I mean, in weightlifting. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. You talk about everything that we want to know. It's been an absolute pleasure. Guys, thanks once again for tuning in, and I will speak to you all next week.